Yeah, so if everybody could just be muted, keep yourself muted, that would be great so we don't interrupt the presenters. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or if they're relevant to the slide, you can ask then if you feel comfortable with that being recorded. And I think that's everything. So I'm gonna turn it over to Stu to get it started.
Super, thanks, Bridget. So this little talk today, of course, we entitled it Renewable Energy, but I think it's fair to point out at the beginning, there's a lot of different kinds of renewable energy, but the focus today here is really going to be on solar, because that's what we have in most abundance here in Ashland. And it's also something that the city is trying to support financially and programmatically. But we don't want to forget about wind and geothermal and other good sources of renewable energy. So today will be mostly solar, and I thought it'd be good just to talk about a couple of the reasons why people choose to do solar. I think we often hear about it as being, fancy technology that's really cool and it's going to solve a lot of problems, but it's really quite a bit more nuanced than that. There's a lot of different environmental and economic benefits that come out of solar, and people use solar for a lot of different things. So the main thing would be to, secure low carbon and renewable energy. It's fair to point out that the electricity that we have here in Ashland is considered, it is low carbon. It's hydroelectric generated for the most part, but it is not considered by everyone to be a renewable resource, meaning that hydropower may not be going forever. So it's, good to think about solar as being both low carbon and renewable. Many people expect or hope to see reduced energy bills. Some folks look at solar as an investment opportunity, increasing the value of their home, or simply investing in a large community solar project for a financial return. Many people have figured out ways to do this. Also, solar is super reliable, no moving parts. It's totally silent, except for sometimes the electronics make a little bit of noise, but no more than any other computer. So solar typically has expected lifetime in excess of 20 to 25 years. And many people expect a well-maintained panel would last significantly longer than that. Energy independence is a big reason people think about solar, but I want to put a little asterisk next to that one, and also the resilience to disaster, because just having a solar system doesn't guarantee either of those things, but they're a step in the right direction. And also, installing solar is a good way to show your support for renewable energy, to help influence people, and to show that you're doing your part. So there's just a few reasons, not a comprehensive list. Okay, next slide. And Larry, feel free to chime in here if you see something I'm forgetting. But how to determine if your site is good for solar? Usually what I do is tell people to go outside of their house in the middle of the day and look at where the sun is. If you have pretty good sun between mid-morning to mid-afternoon, then that's going to tell you your solar resource is pretty good. You definitely want to have that sun in the summer. It helps if you have it in the winter. Basically, the more sun you get, the better your resource is. But that middle portion of the day is the most crucial, because that's when the most intense solar radiation happens, and you really want to capture that. Larry, do you want to add anything?
Well, one of the things you might want to consider is, because in Ashland you have a lot of trees, what potential there is over time for that solar resource to be affected by growth of those trees.
Yes. And, where you put solar is super important. Ideally, you want it pointing south, angled at the right angle to catch the most amount of sun. And depending on how you install solar, it may be fixed. It may be on your roof in a place that's not going to move. It could be out in a field on a pole. It could be something that tracks the sun. Typically, what you'll see in a residential installation is just solar mounted on the roof. And what we will start seeing more and more is what we call integrated solar, which is the roof is the solar panel. There's only one of these in Ashland, as far as I've heard so far, but it's going to be sort of the future, I think, of solar, probably in the next decade or two. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there's a couple of different incentives. Ashland has had solar programs clear back since the early 80s, right, Larry? Is that the solar access ordinance came along? So Ashland has been considering solar policies for a really long time. And we had, I believe, one of the first in the nation solar access policies, which basically ensures that your neighbor can't block your solar resource inadvertently without compensating you. And I think Larry, have we had any issues with that in recent history?
There have been, and most often they're resolved amicably between neighbors.
Yeah. And we don't have a lot of high rises in Ashland, so it hasn't been a huge issue. But know that if you install solar on your property, you have some protection from the city to maintain that resource. We do offer a financial rebate for solar electric systems. There was a time a few decades ago when solar thermal systems were very popular. We had incentives for those at the time as well. I think you'll see probably 99% of solar systems being installed right now are solar electric systems. We also have something called OffSite Solar, which is alternately called virtual net metering. This is basically a policy that the city has created, which will allow you to put solar anywhere in Ashland and have that energy show up on your utility bill. It's really no more complicated than that, but that's the mechanism that the solar co-op is going to leverage, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later on. There's a pretty good explainer about the virtual net metering on the website, and we can certainly take some questions about it as well. But it's a recognition, I think, that Ashland has a lot of very shady sites. A lot of homes have trees and can't take advantage of the full solar resource. So we're trying to make it possible for people to put solar in where it makes the absolutely most sense, because you don't want to put all the effort into solar panels if it's going to be completely covered by shade. That doesn't help anybody. Okay, next slide. Larry, why don't I hand it over to you here?
Okay. So one of the ways that the city of Ashland supports solar and promotes it as a resource is by offering a one-time installation incentive. And that incentive is based on the wattage of the system that is installed. So currently our incentive is at a rate of 25 cents per watt, up to a maximum of $5,000 per system, or per account, actually. That has varied over time. The initial incentive was about $3 a watt way back when we first began this. But as solar has become less expensive over time, and the technology has improved in terms of how much watts you can get per square foot of a solar panel, we've revised our program as well. There is a requirement that a system that gets City of Ashland incentives meets a resource criteria that you have enough solar resource to warrant our incentive. And we have a minimum, what's referred to as a total solar resource fraction of 75%. A total solar resource fraction is the percentage of a system that is perfectly oriented and completely unshaded compared to yours, which might not have the perfect slope and orientation and may have some shading. So there are some tools that installers use to measure that and provide it to us so that we can make a determination of if or how much of a system might qualify for that incentive.
Right. Can I jump in with one other little thing on that?
Yes, please.
That since a lot of folks on the call here may not have the level of experience with solar, it might be helpful to talk about what an average system looks like. So our incentive is 25 cents per watt, but the average residential system is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 6,000 watts. Does that sound about right, Larry?
Yeah.
Yeah, and some homes have larger if they have a bigger roof and higher energy needs. But for an average home, you figure about 5,000 watts is
That
about
$5,000 cap is probably irrelevant for residential scale solar, because that's a 20,000 watt system, and most homes don't have enough roof area to place 20,000 watts. Oh, me again, sorry. So in order to meet that requirement of 75% total solar resource fraction, it really kind of depends on the type of system which is installed. So if you're using a single inverter for the system, then a single location at the worst spot on the array is where that one single total solar resource fraction would need to be provided. If you're using a microinverter system where each panel is operated independently, then part of that system might qualify and part of it might not qualify. In that case, a total solar resource fraction needs to be provided for every panel that is going to qualify. And then there's a third type that we've begun to see now where about 4 of the panels are controlled by a single microinverter. And those we would need the worst panel within those 4 panels, or however many they're grouping together on a microinverter, and get a total solar resource fraction reading for each of those. So that essentially would be typically met by your installer if you're working with an installer. But if you're doing it yourself, and you can, we'd need that data from you to make the determination. So here's an example of how you could provide that data to us. Here's an installation that was just made this week, in fact. In fact, this was the integrated system that Stu was referring to. But you can see the panels are facing the west here. So facing west automatically reduces the resource fraction by about 15%. So it starts out at 85%. And I've got some corresponding numbers here that are probably inaccurate because of it. But so what we would need in the case of microinverter controlled system is identify each panel by number and then show us a related total solar resource fraction for each of those panels, as you can see in the table to the right. In this case, with the numbers that I have entered, and they're not accurate, they're hypothetical, 8 of these 12 panels would qualify for incentives.
I might just chime in that this seems very technical and bureaucratic, but the reason we go through this process is to make sure that we don't spend utility ratepayer money on panels that are sitting under a shady tree. So we don't want to use the utility ratepayer money for ineffective investments. So.
And it could potentially be a factor that you would consider as the installer that, you know, gee, this panel is not going to be very productive. Am I going to invest in it too? I mean, you have the same interest that the city has in making sure that your investment has its maximum effect or a good effect. So.
And I think, Larry, you often tell folks that you can put solar wherever you want, but the city can only incent you for certain types of solar which are high performing.
Yeah, we have a limited resource to work with, and we want to make sure that we get our city and our utility and our customers the biggest bang for their buck. Okay, go ahead. Next one. So here's another identification that we will need if you're using a system which uses a single inverter for multiple panels. And you can see here there is a black circle that identifies where the microinverters are located on this system. And it's not completely identified here, but the 4 panels that location is in the middle of are controlled by those. So we would need that table that I described, that I showed you earlier. These panels would need a number on them identifying, which one is getting which total solar resource fraction, and then this drawing, which would show us which microinverter system we're looking at independently. So we would take the worst panel output from each of these micro arrays, we'd call them here. So I know this is a bit technical, but we have installers that do each of these types of systems, and different locations would warrant different types of systems based on, you know, what their resource is. If a system's in the wide open, perfectly oriented, you might have the least cost system that's most effective using a single inverter. But in Ashland, probably 95% of the systems that are installed use individual microinverters. And we've just begun seeing these grouped microinverter systems because they're a little less expensive to install, fewer inverters. Which is the best investment? That's a kind of a good question, pretty site specific. One of the things to consider about a microinverter versus a single inverter is the inverter is probably the weak link. Panels are typically warranted for 25 years. I'm doubtful that many inverters will last 25 years. So when it comes time to replace inverters, are you replacing a single inverter that's more expensive, or as the microinverters fail stepwise, are you going to have a smaller replacement cost? We don't really know the answer. These things haven't been around for 25 years, these microinverters. So, but that's kind of a consideration. So this, do you want to go through this, Stu, or do you want me to?
Well, I think you can go through it if you like. I just preface it by saying there's a lot of people in Ashland who can't use solar on their roof because they don't own their house, or because they live in an apartment building with 20 other people, or because they have a bunch of shade trees over their house. There's a lot of reasons why people can't do solar, or maybe you live in a historic district and you don't want to change the aesthetic of your home. So there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do solar, but not where you live. And we've created some policies that help do that. And I'll let you.
Why don't you go for it?
Okay. Basically, you can install solar anywhere within the city limits. And we don't really make any special requirements for that, except that you fill out a form that says where that energy should go. And then that energy is then split or not amongst other accounts. So you could have a whole apartment building sharing a system, for example, or you could have a system that is shared by a family, even if people live in 5 different homes. You could have a community-based system, which Jim will tell us about here in a moment. There's a lot of different reasons, but essentially we look at the production from meter A over here. We say this meter produced 100 kilowatt hours. We're going to take that 100 kilowatt hours and put it over here onto your meter every month. And that's pretty much it. It's just an accounting mechanism. And we do this with our utility billing staff. And so that's the service the city provides, is we will transfer the energy from one place to another on your behalf if you use this OffSite Solar program. Okay, I think that's the gist of it, really. Next slide.
I just put an example of
Mm-hmm.
the advantage of the program.
Yeah, so the Ashland Food Co-op has tons of solar. This particular system is on their facility, but because they are so committed to solar, they've also invested in a very large system on the south end of town, on the Oak Street Tank and Steel building, which is now the single largest solar electric system in the city of Ashland. And that system is virtually net metered 100% to the Ashland Food Co-op. So you can use the virtual net metering either as an individual or as a group of folks. It really doesn't matter. Next slide. Oh yeah, and then just a quick pitch for this. Solar is wonderful, and storage is wonderful. And by I say storage, I mean batteries, energy storage. But solar and storage together are pretty amazing. They really increase your ability to be independent and resilient to disasters. And the state of Oregon has put together a pretty new solar storage rebate, which we are not going to get into all the details of here, but just know that if you're interested in batteries, there's now a financial incentive from the state. And we are hoping to support this as well at the city level as best as we can. But right now that means getting the information about this new state incentive out into the public. There are installers in town that do energy storage projects. So I'd encourage you to reach out to them if you have an interest in that. Next. Hey, all right, Jim.
Go
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Bridget.
I was gonna say if anyone had any questions for Larry or Stu before we hand it over to Jim, or you can wait till we stop the recording after. Feel free to just unmute yourself if.
I have a question.
Yeah, Ray. Oops.
Hi. In one of the diagrams it showed you could use some of the energy from your panel in your home, right? But it was coming before the inverter. I assume most of the time it would be after the inverter. So are you using AC?
Well, you're correct that the inverter is what puts the energy into a form that is most commonly used in households.
Okay.
Most systems are using DC power after the inverter.
At home?
In their homes, yeah. Now, obviously, there are alternative types of solar. RVs often these days seem to have solar panels, and they're using DC direct typically.
Okay, so you could use DC or AC, however you want to wire it.
You can, yeah.
The other thing is, in addition to the rebate that you get, you also get an offset credit, right, for your power going to the grid.
Yeah, I don't think that we really described our net metering program very well, but when you get a solar system installed on your home, we place a meter on your home that displaces the existing one that will measure the amount of energy that you send back to us. So in the summertime, often systems generate more than is currently being used in the household. So whenever that occurs, these meters record that energy. And then we apply that to your bill that month. So you have another side of that meter that measures how much energy we send you. That's sort of the base use of your bill. And then we apply the credits that you've been provided by the net metering against that bill. If there's an excess at the end of that month, we carry that credit forward to the following month. And we continue to do that throughout the year. So most systems generate more in the summertime than they consume. And so credits accumulate. And then as winter goes on in our climate, you use up that. If at the end of March, you have an excess credit still available, we will purchase that back from you at your avoided wholesale cost. That's about half of what you're paying for electricity. It's what we would be paying our normal provider of electricity for that energy. And the city's not wanting you to put in a system to be a generator for us because that's more expensive energy than we can purchase elsewhere. So it's in both your interest and our interest to get you to install the right size system for your consumption. And how do you do that? Well, you get your historical energy use. If you're living in the same home that you've been living in prior, you can get historical energy use. But even if you're moving into a new home that someone else has lived in, you can get pretty close by looking at historical energy use that we can provide you.
Oh, wow. Okay, great explanation. Thanks, Larry. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Larry or Stu? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions, so I will go ahead and pass it over to Jim. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here and see a lot of old friends and colleagues I've known for many years. I've been in Ashland since 1990. And just a couple quick things about me. I was part of the ad hoc committee that helped develop the Climate and Energy Action Plan, along with Stu and others. And I remember Ray went to many of those meetings. And so deeply committed to having climate change addressed. Also, I'm a retired teacher at Ashland High School, taught a climate change class there, environmental science. And I just remember when we passed SEEP thinking that we need to have community solar, it needs to happen. I was kind of hoping it would happen, but it turns out it's a tough nut to crack. People have been working on it for 3 years. And so I got involved in this for a year now and just wanting to figure this out. And I'm happy to say we've done it. Yay. Anyway, so I'm going to share with you where we're at. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, we're a for-profit cooperative. We're staffed by volunteers. So we're trying to dramatically increase access to solar power through development of member-owned community solar projects in Ashland. And we're going to do this in a socially and economically responsible fashion. So we are going to be giving about 10% of the power to low-income households, and we're going to try to use local installers as much as we can, keep the dollars local. And this is a beautiful slide that Marnie made for us, just showing you a large system, and a business might have a piece of it. Different homes would have different size pieces of it. And what's cool about the system is you can even change the size of your system to some degree, maybe once a year if you really need to, like if you moved into a bigger house or a smaller house. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as was mentioned, renters can benefit from this, so that's totally awesome. But one thing that's important though is the renter needs to be paying their utilities. Okay, so they have to have an electrical account. If your landlord's paying utilities, then your landlord could join the program, but you couldn't. Businesses can join, okay? And you can see there's a house that's very shaded, and so you also might have a roof that needs to be re-roofed in 10 years, and so you might have hesitation to do solar power because of that extra expense of taking the solar panels off and putting them back on. And so this might be a good system for you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the investment. So when you crunch the numbers, essentially it's a pretty good investment, okay? Again, you're helping address climate change, but it's not too bad. It pays about 4%. So in this one case that I'm giving you, someone is an average home. They're gonna offset 90% of their usage. So they're gonna be investing $9,400 in us, okay? And that's gonna save them $24,700 over 25 years. That's what our calculations indicate. So there's assumptions put into that, of course, the rate of inflation, panel degradation, how much power might increase, and so forth. And in that example, the payback would be less than 12 years. So it's pretty decent. And then if you want your money back though, what's cool is we're going to keep a list of a waiting list and people who want to buy into the system. So you can sell the residual value of your shares to another Ashland Electric customer. So you might, for example, own 4.1% of the system. All right. And then after 5 years, you're leaving Ashland, where you could sell that with the residual value of that to someone else. And we're not going to make it so you can make a killing on it. We're going to determine the fair market value of that fraction, and that'll be what the price is. Okay. Minimum buy-in is going to be 2,700. Okay. It's going to produce 230 kilowatt hours a month. And the reason we do that is that we can't have tons of little systems because every one of these accounts is extra work for the city, and we're trying to minimize the burden we put on the city. So that's how that's going to go. Okay, and yeah, so let's go ahead. Next one, please. Okay, so the virtual net metering ordinance, we've talked about this before. On the right is a picture showing you basically for the science works, this is from Brad Rupp, the different accounts that get the power for that. Okay, so once a year that can be changed. And so when our systems are going to be so big that we might have 30 to 40 people that is being divided amongst, that 100% is. All right. So each month a set fraction of our large array is credited to your account in kilowatt hours. And that's going to lower your monthly electric bill. And that's what the savings are about that I talked about. And it's just like having solar panels on your roof. So Larry kind of went through this, in the summer, you're going to have probably more than you need. So you probably won't be billed for any usage. You'll just bank stuff into the carryover for future months. In the wintertime, you'll slowly eat up that carryover. And then March 31st, after that date, there's a reckoning and the carryover is erased by the city and they pay you the wholesale rate for that extra power. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what did we accomplish this last year? Well, big one, we found a financial model so that works without grants. So that's just totally awesome. I've had 4 meetings with the city, included Larry in one of them and Stu in 3 of them, I believe, to get billing agreements with the city. So we've got some really good understanding of how we're going to work together. We have a solid roof lease template. It's 33 pages of legalese, and it's worked for the oak tank and steel project. And so we're going to be tweaking that as we move forward. And we have a great lawyer that's giving us, a half price rate that's super experienced in community solar. He's the one that did the lease for the oak tank and steel project and also the ScienceWorks lease. And a big one too, one of our board members works for Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and we have a forgivable $10,000 loan to develop our first project. So that's going to help us with our legal fees. It's going to help us develop our website. And then finally, we have promising negotiations to do 2 large projects at Ashland Airport. And we're hoping to make this happen, but there's many other sites around town that we've considered as well. Okay, next one. Okay, so yeah, just to meet our team. So I've talked about myself a bit. So Thomas Endicott, he's our treasurer. As I mentioned, he works for the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. And so this is the oak tank and steel project, the picture of it on the right. So he was the developer for that one. So without him, that project would not exist. And basically he set it up and the co-op ends up owning it and taking all the power, totally off-site. Yeah, so Thomas just has tons of experience and we're really grateful to have him. Pete Jorgensen is a retired civil engineer with experience in construction management. He's willing to really look at legal contracts, our financial models, spreadsheets, very carefully. We have a fractional owner contract as well, that if someone's going to buy a piece of our array, that there's like a 12-page legal document so that everything is very clear and everyone's protected. So he helped with analyzing that. And then Louise Shotcott, retired nurse and climate change activist. So she was on the ad hoc committee with us, with me and Brian as well. And Brian Soul is just joined us. Retired physician, very respected in the community. When we came up with our big ad hoc report, he was the one who laid it out to the whole public what our plan was. So we're grateful to have him. And then other key volunteers we have, Marnie Koopman is a climate scientist, and she's helping us with our website a lot of passion. And so really grateful to have her on our team. Jim Tully, he is helping us with sales. So when we go to businesses looking to get leases, it's really good to have someone with a lot of sales experience to know how to make that work. And David Spinney works on a lot of websites for different climate change groups and other groups in the Valley. So he's been helping us out, which is awesome. Past key volunteers, Jeff Sharp, he invented the Strackers. You can see 3 of them right there on the right. And we might end up having a Stracker system, a ground-based system down the road. We'll see how that goes. Jeff got me involved and he's got tremendous passion for this whole thing. And right now he's in the process of getting his business off the ground. So it's very exciting that there might be lots of Strackers all over Oregon and maybe the United States. Bob Kaplan worked with us a ton on the financial models. So grateful for his efforts. And he's working climate change on a number of fronts in the city right now. And Lori Kaplan, she wrote a 33-page identity report for us to really figure out where we've been, where we might want to consider going. So that was very valuable. Sean Franks, he was our president earlier in the year. So he's provided a lot of great leadership and experience. Brad Roop, yeah, he actually paid for those Strackers at ScienceWorks. And so he's been a pioneer in virtual net metering and shared all of his billing data with me so I can double check just how it's going to work because we've got to make sure this is totally set. Okay, that's our team. Next one. Okay, so if you are interested, you can email me. You can see my email, jimhartmancc@gmail.com. So I'll put you on a list if you're interested in maybe being a fractional owner or if you have a site that you think is very promising. You can also text me. That's my personal number, 541-821-1300. Our website is almost ready, ashland-solar.coop, co-op. And in terms of, I'll just mention what's our next steps. So on Monday, we have already spent a lot of time looking for leases and sites. So I probably spent about 20 hours, but that was back in November. But we're going to get right on that starting next week on Monday. And hopefully we'll have a lease set in maybe, I don't know, maybe in a couple of weeks, that's possible. And then when that is set, then we'll be ready to start getting fractional owners, and we'll have more presentations. One thing I will mention, I've gotten a tremendous amount of help from Solarize Rogue. Ray Pescador Sanchez shared all of his numbers, his model with me, very similar to what we came up with. Anyway, so the thing about Ray's system, he had a 140 kilowatt DC system, and he was able to get promises to buy that power, verbal promises that all came through in 30 days. Okay, so I think this is going to work in Ashland. I definitely think it will sell. Our systems are going to be about 219 kilowatt DC or 199 kilowatts AC. So bigger than Ray's, maybe 50% bigger. But Ray too, he's continuing to work on getting more sites. And I'll also mention that I'm just outside of the city limits. So I have bought 15 panels of Ray's system in Talent. So I had to learn his system frontwards and backwards and convince my wife to sign the contract. And, we did that. Ray shared his contract with us, and that was the basis for us developing our contract for our fractional owners. Okay, so anyway, that's it. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, anyone feel free to chime in with
questions.
Yeah,
I have a question for you, Jim, and maybe it's Stu and Larry as well. Is there, so you mentioned the size of your systems are around 200 kilowatts. Is there any limit to how many of these we can put in Ashland with our Bonneville contract, or?
Yeah, my understanding is that we have talked to Bonneville, it's 199 kilowatts AC. Okay, and that is about 218 DC. Okay, but 199 kilowatts AC is my understanding per transformer. So you've got to figure out where the transformers and so forth.
That's a limitation been placed on us as a Bonneville Power Administration participating utility. But it's really almost not relevant because it doesn't really limit the number of those systems that we can put in. So I think that's a reasonable limit to work with. And frankly, the rooftops that we have available, they kind of lend themselves to that limit also. We don't have huge areas to work with typically.
Well, at some point, would we be purchasing less power from Bonneville if we're generating more in Ashland?
Potentially, but with transportation being electrified, I don't see that happening. I think we're going to be challenged to generate more energy over time.
Okay. Well, I mean, one reason I'm asking some of this is we know we're into renegotiating the contract and just trying to be aware of how much more headroom we could generate for ourselves as our electricity use goes up, and et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously projecting. We don't have the true answer for what electric growth will be, but we really haven't seen a significant reduction in the amount of power from any of our conservation measures that we've been doing for years and years. We continue to come up with new devices that use electricity, and now transportation is a potentially very large user of additional electricity. So again, I don't have a perfect crystal ball, but that's just sort of my take on it anyway.
Okay, so it sounds like right now there's really no limit to the number of these 200 kilowatt AC systems that could go up.
Yeah, the challenge has been organizing and completing them. We've really got a couple of those systems that are of scale so far. The Oak Street Tank and Steel and Co-op project and Brad Roop's project for basically serving only his own properties. He has rental properties around, and what was there, 7 or 8 of those?
I think it's fair to say that at some point we'll come up against some infrastructure challenges, but we have a lot more administrative and policy challenges in front of us before that becomes a factor.
Yeah, well, appreciate all the work that the co-op volunteers have done, and certainly ironing out the examples and contracts and all that. It's be great to get the kickoff going.
I just would chime in that my goal is that we'd have like 5 large systems in 2 years. So 599 kilowatt AC systems in 2 years.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, Jeff's Strackers are separate. They're not part of whatever the ultimate grid on the co-op would be. Is that correct?
Yeah, his system is completely separate from the co-op's system.
Okay, and as far as the city's concerned, that's also, I mean, that's separate too. It's operated separately. Stu?
Yeah, I'm not really clear on the question. I think you're asking whether the product that Jeff sells is different than the solar co-op. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, could the solar co-op invest in Strackers
Sure.
that were competitive or not competitive?
Yeah, the Stracker is just a something to mount solar panels on. Yeah. So depending on the type of project, you may or may not want to use that type of mounting hardware. It's got pros and cons, just like everything else.
Of course. Okay. Thank you.
And I just might add, we might, for example, do a project in the parking lot at Shopping Cart. Okay, and if we did that, we'd put out a request for proposals for different people to come up with a ground mount system. All right, and Jeff Sharp would come up with his system. There might be one that's like permanent shading, like you might see in the California. There's a lot of, big shades over parking lots that's totally fixed. And then we would look at the numbers on all that and decide which is the best way to go.
What other questions we have floating around here? Be brave. Okay, well, I guess everybody's ready to take the next step.
Can I jump in?
Totally.
Sorry. So I have gas forced air for heating. We rarely use our air conditioning. I have already on my roof 30-year-old panels that have not worked for at least 25 years for water heating. I assume since the last time my roof was re-roofed, that would be about 25 years ago. I'd have to have the panels for the water removed, the huge tank that's in my attic removed, and the roof re-roofed, and then I could start this process, and it's only for electricity, correct?
Yeah, a solar electric system will only provide, it doesn't interact with your solar water heating at all. Whether you have to remove that tank, I'm not sure. If you need the space, maybe, but you could probably leave that there, just drain it.
Yeah, I don't need this. I don't need the space.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily pay to remove the tank, but if you need the roof space and the solar water heating is not working and you need to re-roof anyway, yeah, take those panels off if they're not working.
And so how does it work with GFA, given that, I heat in the winter with GFA and wood. I had wood stove from back in the day, implemented that. So I don't actually use a lot of electricity in the winter. And, my historic use in the summer, it could be as much as $100 to $150 a month in electricity alone. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested in doing this because I want to take advantage of the state's battery system for backup and in case of, some kind of environmental disaster where we lose our power. Am I good a candidate for this kind of thing?
I think you need to evaluate the particulars of your site, but the fact of the beauty of net metering is that it doesn't matter when your consumption occurs. Really, you size the system for your annual consumption, and we'll apply the credits whenever they occur.
So okay, and so the whole storage thing with batteries and all that with the state is apart from this, and would require me to look into that and see about having some kind of backup system for battery storage, correct?
Yeah, and batteries do consume some of your production just to maintain the batteries. So if you're going to use a battery system, you could upsize from your historical use a little bit, and your battery supplier can assist you with that sizing, you know, how much is required based on the efficiency of their batteries.
So I know it's a no-no to have GFA in your house anymore, but a few years back when I got it replaced, nobody was really talking about it. I understand that GFA can also be used with solar. They have that's even more efficient than electricity backup with solar. Do you know anything about that, or because Ashland is fully electric, maybe that's not even part of the deal here?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable enough to. Stu, do you want to jump in?
I'm not totally sure I grasped the question about the hybrid system. It may be, one thing that's happening in Ashland is a lot of folks are transitioning to more heat pump systems, or adding electric vehicles, or looking at more people living in their homes. And so looking at their future electric load, I think that's where something like the Ashland Solar Co-op is super handy once it's up and running, is that you could scale the amount of energy that you're needing. Whereas if you install a solar electric system, you're going to need to know upfront what sort of annual production you're looking to get. And if you're going to keep your gas furnace and just supplement your electrical use, it might be a very small solar electric system, but you might still want to get it, especially if you're looking at batteries, because it gives you a way to top your battery off. However, if you're looking at getting an electric vehicle down the road, or if you're looking at getting a heat pump or changing, so you have the ability to use gas or electric heat is another popular thing. People will put a mini split heat pump in, and they'll use that for heating and cooling during 90% of the year. And so they're shifting to using more electricity just for carbon or environmental benefit, or for indoor air quality, because oftentimes people have combustion gases in their house, which affect their asthma and allergies, things like that. So a lot of folks are switching to either getting rid of gas or switching to have more electric heating options, which is basically heat pumps. So, and that goes for water heating as well as space heating. So solar can help.
Right. My heat pump's also, my heat pump's also 30 years old, and I know it's going to need time. It's interesting that I could do both. I like that. I eventually, once my furnace goes out, it's relatively new, I assume I'll move completely over to electric. I would rather not, would rather not pull it out before it's time, but that's good to know. I'll ping Jim Hartman after the meeting and see what we can, potentially do. I have a great site. I have a huge south-facing roof with no trees blocking anything. So that might be the best way to go.
So something I pursue, Kathy, is that the city does have incentives for replacing gas systems with heat pumps. So you can check with a residential conservation specialist, Dan Cunningham, and he can, when you're ready, walk you through what would be required and what the benefit to you would be.
I think it's
great. Thanks. I'll get a hold of it.
Yeah, and it's probably a good opportunity to point out something that we mentioned at previous little talks like this, which is whether or not you plan on making any changes to your heating system. it's good to put a plan together before it breaks, because if your heating system breaks, oftentimes people will just get the fastest thing they can get, which is typically not efficient or any better than what they had before. So it's good to just contact some installers, get some bids, even if you think you're a few years out.
Well, even to get in the queue, because I noticed on the state system, the battery thing, it's a long wait. They're really behind on batteries and other things that you can acquire. So getting in the queue is a good idea. Thanks so much. It's been interesting.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we're kind of closing in on the last few minutes. Is there one more question?
I can also, since we're getting here to the end, I can stop the recording if anybody else has any personal questions.